Today. Welcome. We got to get started because we have a very full schedule. I like a packed agenda. I literally have this down to the minute on the agenda, so we are not going to delay. I am Paul Brigner. I'm the head of U.S. Policy and Strategic Advocacy for the Electric Coin Company, the developers of Zcash. On behalf of the Electric Coin Company and our co-host, the Blockchain Association, welcome and thank you for joining us for this special edition of the PGP for Crypto Breakfast and Roundtable. As most of you know, I would normally kick things off by saying, I hope you enjoyed some pretty good pancakes. Now it is time to talk about pretty good policy for crypto. Well, today's a little different, but I just did say that. Before we have our roundtable session, we will celebrate Global Encryption Day. We will celebrate today by discussing how important encryption is for protecting people online and in the work we do on cryptocurrency. Unlike the roundtable discussion that will follow, the first part of this meeting will be on the record, recorded, and live streamed for people to view later. I want to take a moment to thank and recognize a few people who have helped make this gathering possible. First, thank you, Kristin Smith. Her amazing team at the Blockchain Association, I just can't speak highly enough of them and all the work they do. I want to thank them for co-sponsoring this entire PGP for Crypto series. Kristin, would you like to say a few words of welcome?
Thank you, Paul, and thank you everyone for being here today. Happy Global Encryption Day. If you think about it, why do we celebrate holidays? Why do we commemorate events? And it's usually because it's something of high importance and oftentimes an issue or a cause around which there was a battle. And I think we can't take for granted that we have encryption today. I don't think we can take for granted that it's going to be around in the future. I think as we look at some of the things that Paul and I and others have been working on around crypto policy, there once again is this question about, what does it mean to have privacy? And these are battles that I think are going to be ongoing and only going to get more intense in the years to come. So I'm going to just stop right there because we have actual giants here on the screen, like actual giants because they're tall and the screen is big, but in that they have really fought to ensure that that we have encryption, that we have privacy, and are real thought leaders, both from a technological, but also an advocacy perspective. So thank you, Paul. It's just been an honor to partner with you and your team on these events. And I really think it's done a lot of work to bring the community together here in Washington. So thank you for everything you do.
Thank you, Kristin. Okay, I want to thank the CyberSmart Research Center for providing this venue for our meeting and, of course, Georgetown School of Continuing Studies. Electric Coin Company is a proud sponsor of the outstanding crypto and blockchain related research that happens at CyberSmart, and I would highly encourage everyone here to learn more about that program. Today's a great day to do that because we have two CyberSmart representatives here present. We have Dr. Eric Berger from Virginia Tech University. Dr. Berger, and we have Dr. Jarek Nawritsky from Notre Dame University. Jarek, thank you. They will be happy to tell you all about CyberSmart. You all have probably met Dr. Matsuo. He can't be here today, unfortunately, but please learn about CyberSmart. All right, let's get started. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers to talk about Global Encryption Day. Our first speaker is Ryan Polk. Ryan is the Director of Internet Policy at the Internet Society. He's going to tell you all about the Global Encryption Day program and the Global Encryption Coalition. As you might have guessed, Electric Coin Company is a proud member of the Global Encryption Coalition. On a personal note, Ryan and I go pretty far back. Some of you know that I formerly worked for the Internet Society, serving as their North American Bureau Director for a few years. At that time, Ryan, I think, had just joined, and we had the opportunity to work together on pretty good policy for the Internet. Just as Ryan is doing today, one of my major activities at the Internet Society was advocating for encryption. As an example of that, you can find a short documentary film on YouTube that I co-produced back in 2015 called The Internet Exposed: Encryption, Backdoors, Privacy, and the Quest to Maintain Trust. So it truly warms my heart that the Internet Society is continuing to advocate for encryption, and Ryan is now leading that charge globally as the driving force behind the Global Encryption Coalition. Ryan, please come tell us about Global Encryption Day, the coalition, and why it is so important to protect us all online. Put your slides up.
And Paul didn't say it, but I was very young at the time. I was an intern at the time. So Paul was a great mentor about the Internet Society. So today is Global Encryption Day, and this is a fairly new holiday. This is only our second annual Global Encryption Day, but it's a chance for us to really take a stand as the internet community and explain to the world why encryption matters. And so as part of this, I want to give you all just an overview of what the state of the encryption debate is today. Oh, here we go. So before we get to that, here's why encryption matters. I loved the things I saw today that said privacy is normal, the t-shirts, et cetera, et cetera. That's the truth. Privacy is normal, and it's normal for everyone. People always say, oh, why are you using encryption? You have nothing to hide. The answer should be, who do I have nothing to hide from? Because you have something to hide from at least someone. And so encryption is a key part of that. Encryption keeps us safe. It keeps activists safe around the world. During the Arab Spring, encryption was what kept protesters from being abducted by security services. It keeps LGBTQ individuals safe as they navigate coming out, which can be a very sometimes dangerous process. It also protects governments. So even the European Union, who lately has said, we don't like strong encryption, actually tells their staff to use Signal, which is an end-to-end encrypted app, to protect themselves. End-to-end encryption is really fundamental to trust and security on the internet, not just privacy, but the trust and security of it all. But it's under threat. There's governments all around the world who are saying, because we need to have access to the data of criminals, we need to have access to all encryption. But there's no way to do that without breaking encryption and undermining the security for everyone. That's just the consensus among cybersecurity experts. And we've been fighting this war, and others before me have been fighting this war, which has been dubbed the crypto wars, since the 1990s. In the early mid-1990s, there was a fight over something called the Clipper chip, which was an actual device that was going to be put into computers to ostensibly encrypt data before it's sent across the internet, but it had a backdoor in it. And so it was not actually secure. And a researcher quickly found that. But then in the 2000s, we kind of hit this golden age of surveillance for governments around the world. There was a lot of data being sent across the internet that wasn't strongly encrypted. And so we came to find out with the Snowden revelations that there was a lot of data being scooped up by governments and surveilled. Because of the revelations, the internet community actually came together at one of the Internet Engineering Task Force and came out with almost like a manifesto, I don't know the right term for it, that said we need to start encrypting the internet. We need to encrypt the protocols. We need to encrypt all our data. And since then, there's been this bloom of encryption being used on the internet, and lots more end-to-end encryption. But as a result, governments who got used to surveilling the internet and surveilling all of our data now feel like there's a threat that they need to take care of. And so they've been calling for things like encryption backdoors, or as it's also termed, exceptional access, ways for them to gain access to users' communications so that they can look for criminals or other data. But in doing so, they break the security and privacy for everyone. So the crypto wars started 30 years ago. These are the battlegrounds of just the last 5. There's governments all around the world who are trying to pass policies that would undermine encryption. And if you look at Europe, for instance, there's 6 countries, and then also the European Union, who's also trying to pass policies that would undermine end-to-end encryption. So you might think this is kind of a gloomy situation. And You'd probably be right, but in reality, there's going to be some light at the end of the tunnel. Just give me a second. So recently in the encryption debate, we've seen a bit of an evolution of a narrative from governments. So in the very beginning of the encryption debate, in most recent iteration since about 2014, governments were really focusing on countering terrorism. They said terrorists were using these networks to share communications, to plan attacks. And so we need to have access to user data so that we can monitor for these terrorist attacks. That started to go to the wayside. Then during the Trump administration, there was a really focus on drug crime, and even internationally, there's a focus on drug crime. And now the narrative we see from governments is this idea of fighting child abuse. Child abuse online is a horrible thing and needs to be addressed. However, the unintended consequences of breaking encryption to do so end up hurting everyone, including children. At the same time, we've seen shifting demands from governments in the last 5 years. In the beginning, they were asking for specific things, encryption backdoors. So give us a specific way to get in on demand. Apple, for instance, was told that they need to find a way to provide access to law enforcement after the San Bernardino shootings. Then after the community pushed back on this idea of encryption backdoors, the demand from governments became exceptional access, which is just another code word for encryption backdoors. And now, even more recently, there's been this focus on content monitoring. So this is monitoring from the companies themselves. So not even an on-demand access sort of thing for where law enforcement can come to you and say, we need to have access to this specific data. Instead, they're saying companies need a way to monitor the communications being sent across their networks for unlawful content. And so that really gets to the child abuse issues, but also misinformation, which is another reason that we see calls for breaking encryption. Unfortunately, for end-to-end encrypted services, there's no way to do this content monitoring without undermining the security of those services. So that's the issue there. So in the midst of all this, we started the Global Encryption Coalition with CDT, the Center for Democracy and Technology, and Global Partners Digital about 2 years ago in early 2020. We started with 30 members, and now we've grown to about 300 members. So these are members all around the world. You can see kind of where we are geographically, who come together and push back against threats when they arise, threats to encryption. And so what the Global Encryption Coalition has allowed us to do is create this informal network of advocates who, when a threat arises, can really quickly bring international attention to what might be a attack on encryption in Belgium, for instance. Something that might not really get in the news in Belgium if there wasn't people actually, pushing back on this and making noise. And so by bringing international attention to it, you can make policymakers think twice and start actually listening and thinking about what the unintended consequences of what they're asking for will be. So this is that light at the end of the tunnel I was talking about. Encryption advocates are winning. If you look at how many people are actually using end-to-end encryption, the leading apps like encrypted messaging apps that use end-to-end encryption, there's over 3.3 billion users of these apps. That's an insane amount of people who are relying on end-to-end encryption to facilitate their private and secure communications. Also, we're seeing internet protocols becoming more secure. The IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force, has made security really a focus since the mid-2010s. And so we're seeing more protocols like TLS 1.3 and other protocols coming out that really have security at their core, which has been a really wonderful thing to see. And by see, it's something that most people will never see because it's hidden on the internet. And the other thing is, even when bad policies do come into place, governments themselves are pretty loath to actually use them. In the last 5 years, there's 2 countries that really stand out as introducing policies that would undermine encryption. And this is the United Kingdom and Australia. Both of these laws would allow them to force companies to undermine their encryption and provide access to their data. And this would be an on-demand sort of thing. So come to a company with a requirement to provide access. So far as we know, because of reporting mechanisms, neither of those countries have actually used those powers. These are powers that they've demanded and said, we really, really want, and yet they don't actually use them. And I think the reason for that is they understand what the unintended consequences will be if they use these powers. And they don't want to be the ones standing over the body of the internet holding the trigger. And just as a quick example of kind of the power that encryption advocates can have when they work together is this example of Belgium. So last year, the Belgian government wanted to introduce a piece of legislation that would undermine strong encryption, basically create a on-demand system or a law where they could force companies to break end-to-end encryption. The consensus among experts in Belgium was that this law is going to pass. There's no way this isn't going to pass. It's got support. Belgians don't care about privacy is what I always heard. They're always the ones who will invite the policeman into their house for a cup of tea. And what we did with the coalition and with our allies on the ground in Belgium is we just amped up the pressure. Suddenly there were news articles coming out all across Europe about how Belgium is going to lead the way in Europe for breaking encryption and undermining the internet. We had people reaching out to policymakers. We found old tweets from the new president of Belgium at the time who was tweeting about support of encryption from 2017. And so by pulling together a huge group of advocates to do scrappy advocacy, we actually created enough media attention that suddenly the opposition parties started jumping off the ship and said, wait, hold on a second. We don't want to do this. This might break the internet. And by doing that, by the end of the year, Belgium actually gave up on that policy. They were done. They thought that it was going to be a mistake. And in fact, they even came out, the government agency who was promoting this law even came out and said, we need to wait until we can see if we can do this in a way that won't undermine the security and privacy of our users. So by working together with coalition and with other allies, you can have a huge, huge impact, especially in places where, smaller places too, where the policies aren't as developed yet on encryption, and you can really make a change so that you can keep encryption safe. And I think that's it for me, but I can't change my slide. So, yeah. So thanks all.
Am I still sharing my, trying to get the Zoom there? Oh, there we go. There we go. Okay, thanks for bearing with me. That was amazing, Ryan. I'm so proud of the work you're doing, and that was a really informative update. Okay, now we have a very special guest speaker, and he is particularly appropriate for this PGP for crypto gathering for obvious reasons. I'm thrilled to announce and introduce Phil Zimmermann. He's the creator of Pretty Good Privacy and member of the Internet Hall of Fame. Pretty Good Privacy is an email encryption software package originally designed as a tool for human rights, published for free on the internet in 1991. Because of his work to make PGP available, Phil was the target of a 3-year criminal investigation because the US government held that US export restrictions for cryptographic software were violated when PGP spread worldwide. Phil's work has deeply inspired me and countless others, and I can think of no better person to talk to us about the importance of encryption. Please welcome the creator of PGP and the Internet Hall of Fame member, Phil Zimmermann. Phil.
Okay, so, well, I've been making pretty much the same arguments for about 30 years about privacy and civil liberties and freedom and you know, all the civil liberties arguments for encryption. But I thought it would be good to update that a little bit today and talk about something that I haven't talked as much about over the years. And that is that we need end-to-end encryption because we need national security. Instead of pitting national security against end-to-end encryption, we should be recognizing that national security is best served by end-to-end encryption. And if you look at the pressures that are emerging from all these governments that we saw earlier on the map, for the most part, those pressures emerge from the law enforcement parts of those governments, not so much the intel agencies. I mean, during the 1990s, I debated NSA officials at the beginning of that decade and FBI officials. But as the decade wore on, near the end of the 1990s, the NSA had backed away from it and had left it in the hands of the FBI. The FBI never gave up. They continued to push hard for backdoors for law enforcement. NSA probably backed off because they figured out a way to get what they want without putting backdoors in, as we saw in the Snowden revelations. I mean, a lot of it has to do with inserting malware on their targets. But the thing is, they would target. They would do. I mean, for example, when we saw in the Mueller report, there was video evidence that they had gathered from surveillance cameras inside the Russian facility that was breaking into American networks, for the election. And those cameras were hacked by the NSA, and that gave them, they were able to identify specific people, and they were named in the indictment. So the NSA's approach is to hack into their target. And if we look here, like in the UK, there's pressures to try to reverse course on end-to-end encryption to require backdoors. And we see that largely coming from law enforcement in the UK. GCHQ has not been very vocal about it. And I think it's pretty much for the same reason, that the intel community recognizes the role of end-to-end encryption in protecting the whole of society. A lot of Western European democracies have deployed 5G infrastructure manufactured by Huawei. And Huawei is, deeply, deeply affected by the Chinese military and Chinese intelligence. And so a widespread deployment of 5G infrastructure across Europe is going to give China, it has already given China huge SIGINT capabilities comparable to NSA in the areas where they are deployed. Now, the UK has started to recognize this, and I think they're backpedaling and trying to find other ways to get 5G coverage. There's a couple of European vendors that have 5G equipment. It's more expensive than Huawei, and it's not as good as Huawei. And so that's probably why they weren't selected initially. But they should be deploying equipment from vendors that are not controlled by a potential adversary. And if you find yourself in an environment where you need to communicate over a network that's controlled by a potential adversary, you'd better be using end-to-end encryption. Back in the early 2000s, around 2005 or 2006, I was in Ukraine a lot because I had a software project there to develop my ZRTP protocol, which is used for secure telephony. And when I was there, I remember talking to somebody in the Ukrainian military who said that the Ukrainians at that time in the mid 2000s were using radio equipment made by the Soviet Union, made in Russia. Combat radio systems, were made by their enemy. Imagine how awkward that is. Now, I'm pretty sure that so many years have passed and so much has happened that probably today they're not using radio equipment from Russia. but they were back then. And so they felt extremely vulnerable because of that. Well, that's where we find ourselves today across Europe, in areas where the telcos have deployed 5G gear made by China. So they need to get out of that. But it'll probably take them years to escape that. But while they're still afflicted by that misfortune, I should say afflicted by that bad decision, everybody needs to be using end-to-end encryption. Government ministries, banks, civil society, the healthcare system, tech companies, everything across society needs to use end-to-end encryption if they're communicating across a network controlled by a potential enemy. So the national security argument for end-to-end encryption is quite strong, especially given today's geopolitical situation. Now, there is another thing to consider, and that is, if we look at all the Western democracies, the liberal democracies that have collapsed into autocracies, the number, it's an ever-growing number, and it's rather alarming. We see this happening in Hungary, in Poland, in Brazil, in the United States. We're seeing liberal democracies sliding into autocracies. And if you have backdoors, because the law enforcement part of the government was trustworthy at some point, maybe, they're not going to be trustworthy if they're directed by an autocracy. An autocrat will use the criminal justice system to prosecute enemies and protect their friends. This is what Trump was trying to do. And this is what we see in other autocracies. And so we need to have end-to-end encryption with no backdoors, because someday our democracies may collapse into autocracies. And if we want to reverse that and organize opposition to restore democracy, that opposition is going to need end-to-end encryption to organize politically. And also that is yet another aspect of national security. National security against having your liberal democracy permanently fall into an autocracy. And I say permanent because it becomes permanent if that autocracy has imposed backdoors, or even the predecessor to the autocracy. If the liberal democracy imposed backdoors on encryption and then they collapse into an autocracy, that autocracy is a much stronger position to stay in power indefinitely. So that's my national security argument.
Thank you, Phil. That was perfect for what we needed to hear today, and I think so relevant to this discussion. So I'm just so grateful for the work that you've done, and I continue to be inspired by your ongoing efforts to secure communications. So thanks for your work. Thanks for being here today, and just please keep it up. Please keep it up. All right. Thank you.
Okay, my pleasure.
Thank you. All right. Wow. Our next speaker today is Zooko Wilcox, the founder and CEO of the Electric Coin Company, the developer of the cryptocurrency Zcash. Zooko is a renowned cyberpunk who has dedicated himself to empowering people with economic freedom. And as you will hear, encryption and privacy it makes possible are central to his efforts to contribute to and support a fair, open currency to protect freedom, dignity, consent, and security of people all over the world. I am very proud to introduce my CEO, Zooko Wilcox.
Thank you, Paul. Can you all hear me okay?
You can, thank you.
All right, well, it is an honor to be invited to speak here. It's an honor to be invited to speak Uh-oh, somebody needs to mute. Samia Kasinovich.
Going.
Everyone should
that
mute.
coffee was good. And I don't like the coffee that's down here. I don't know
Yeah.
if it's
Anyone
bad.
mute someone else?
Good standards.
I think we're good
How
now.
about now?
Sorry about that. Yes.
All right. Hey, it is an honor to be invited to speak after Phil Zimmermann, and it's an honor to be invited to speak to all of you on this day, Global Encryption Day. What is encryption and why do we care about it so much? I'm a technologist, so I've been thinking for pretty much my whole life, since I was 17 or so, about encryption and what it is and how it changes over time. Encryption is ancient. It was used by Julius Caesar and probably older people, older figures, more ancient figures than that. But the first revolutionary paradigm shift in cryptography came in 1970. Before that, we had, that's called public key cryptography, as you know. Before that, we had symmetric cryptography, which is mostly only useful for centralized or hierarchical communication. It's most useful for generals and kings to talk to each other more than anything else. And two things came in the late 20th century: the internet, which was the first global open peer-to-peer communication, and public key cryptography, which was the first peer-to-peer encryption. And we needed peer-to-peer encryption to secure the peer-to-peer internet. And the people that discovered public key cryptography fought they performed some courageous acts of civil disobedience to make that new breakthrough in science become part of humanity's shared legacy, instead of being turned into a national security secret and basically kept out of the hands of the world. And those people, which includes Phil Zimmermann, were the people that I discovered when I was very young. I think I was probably about 17 when I read Phil Zimmermann's essay called "Why I Wrote PGP." And that essay and Phil's example turned me on to the technology and to the human rights implications of it. And as we all know, as Ryan just summarized the history, there were certain factions inside the US government at the time that attempted to suppress the deployment of this new technology and keep it out of the hands of normal people, in a long, complex policy battle involving both policy debates and civil disobedience. And I was merely a foot soldier in that battle. I was lucky enough to work with Phil and a man named Hal Finney on PGP itself, as well as on other end-to-end encryption protocols during those years. And what we have learned is that peer-to-peer communication and peer-to-peer secure communication have been a great blessing for society, right? Everything that all of us do, that everyone around us needs in life, has been wonderfully improved by the internet ever since it came out. Jobs, schools, hospitals, family, transportation, art, science and the progress of science and industry and commerce, all of this has been radically transformed and improved by the secure internet and government. As Ryan mentioned, there's this amazing turning point when, after years of trying to suppress and undermine this kind of infrastructure, the Obama White House started mandating that every national government internet service had to use strong encryption to make our national infrastructure safer. So that was the end of Crypto Wars 1, as Ryan described. And now I want to describe an outgrowth of encryption, because my theme is, what is encryption exactly, since the technology keeps changing. And that next thing is Bitcoin. Satoshi Nakamoto solved an ancient computer science problem of how to have a shared database in which a peer-to-peer database in which, instead of relying on some centralized party to let you know what's in our shared data and to be honest with you about the contents of the shared data, instead we can have peer-to-peer shared data in which everyone has assurance that they're seeing the right thing as the same thing everyone else is seeing. And the way he solved that was by, instead of having a centralized party, we're going to broadcast the data to everyone so that everyone can check everyone else's work. And that means that when blockchains were invented, they were fundamentally incompatible with end-to-end encryption. And Satoshi was well aware of this problem. Satoshi was well aware of the value of end-to-end encryption for human rights. And he and Hal Finney again and others tried to solve that problem at the time that they were inventing Bitcoin and blockchains. And they couldn't do it because humanity's science knowledge had not yet leveled up to the necessary level to solve that problem. And I happen to be a small-time contributor to that project as well. I wrote the first blog post on the internet about Bitcoin, and the initial Bitcoin homepage that Satoshi put up linked to my homepage. And it was a few years later, after Bitcoin was launched, that Satoshi and Hal and the others had this conversation about if it would be possible to use a next generation of technology to fix the absence of encryption in blockchains. And they correctly concluded, I think this was in maybe 2013 that they had this conversation. They correctly concluded that the technology wasn't there yet, the science wasn't there yet, and so they couldn't do it. And it was a few months after that conversation that Satoshi disappeared from the internet forever. And then it was shortly thereafter that scientists, cryptographers, discovered the next generation of encryption technology, which can allow all kinds of new things, and that's zero-knowledge proofs. Well, they had already been discovered as a scientific concept decades earlier, but in about 2013, some scientists found a way to do zero-knowledge proofs that was so efficient and flexible that it could be used to solve problems like this. So that's where Zcash comes in. We, as the Zcash project, put together a superhero team of scientists and engineers. And in 2016, we launched the first industrial strength implementation of zero-knowledge proofs in the Zcash cryptocurrency. And what that does in a blockchain is it allows you to put end-to-end encryption into a blockchain. So now this end-to-end encryption, due to the constant advance of technology, can can sort of go more places. Now we can have end-to-end encryption in not only on the internet, not only in our devices, and not only in our databases, but now also in blockchains or public shared databases. Now, throughout this process, this history, those of us fighting on the side of encryption and civil rights, we more or less all, at least I, really value good law enforcement and good national security. We really want that, right? We really want to live in a society that is safe and stable and flourishing. And we believe that end-to-end encryption is a necessary part of such a society. And we believe that the harms done by bad people are far, far outweighed by the blessings produced by all the good people of the world when they have freedom and rights and they're free to voluntarily cooperate with each other. So when I was preparing to give this talk, I talked to Paul, and he said something that stuck with me. He said, we look around today and there's so much that would just never have come into existence if it hadn't been for the internet and for public key encryption coming along to secure the internet. And what will we look back on in the future? What blessings will we and our children have that would just never have been possible if we hadn't deployed this next generation of encryption? So my question was, what is encryption exactly if the technology keeps evolving and becomes able to do new things? And my answer is, encryption is freedom of speech and freedom of the press and freedom of association. Encryption is the backbone of a stable and flourishing society in which people have rights and they can come together voluntarily to lift one another up. And that's why I care about it so much. The end. That's my whole talk.
That was incredible, Zooko. Thank you. I love it. I just can't even say enough. I had a religious moment there. Okay. All right, let's move on in our agenda. Our final speaker today is my good friend, Dr. Frederic Lemieux. Dr. Lemieux is a professor of practice and faculty director at Georgetown's School of Continuing Studies. He specializes in the field of intelligence, cybersecurity, and disruptive technologies. And he is going to share his perspectives on encryption and share a little information about the programs here at Georgetown School of Continuing Studies. Professor Lemieux, I'm sorry you have to follow that. It's just...
We have so many good speakers. I was not realizing it was already my time to come up here and talk to you. So I want to say thank you to Paul to bring this event here at SCS. It's very appreciated. Really happy to meet this community, this vibrant community. I want also to thank the speakers for their presentation this morning. I will not take too much time. I just want to say that, you know, like this is the kind of event that SCS is striving for. We like to connect with exactly vibrant and innovative community. We've been doing that for so long. I mean, if we look back to the history of SCS, founded in 1954, called up to create new programs to turn around, for example, the workforce in the aftermath of the Second World War. We were also, we developed new programs in the 60s, 70s with a Bachelor of Liberal Studies, a Master's of Liberal Studies to address the profound social changes that was happening back then in the 60s, 70s. Since the 2000s, we are involved very much into emerging industries and looking at how we can respond to rapid demand into skilled workforce. And we do a lot in that areas by developing not only master's degrees or bachelor degree completion, but we're also doing a lot of like custom programs and also professional certifications or certificates for workers. And Paul and I goes back, like a while. We started to work together on developing a blockchain certificate. I think it was in 2018, I believe. So that gives you examples of what we're doing here at SCS. My role is to basically oversee 3 master's program. And I was listening to the speakers this morning, and like they kind of like covering what we're doing in intelligence, for example. So I'm running the applied intelligence program, and encryption is certainly like a big discussion with the intelligence community, because most of our students are coming from the intelligence community or will work in the intelligence community. So that is a ongoing discussion going on in the classroom. Same thing for cybersecurity. So I'm leading the master's in cyber security risk management, and encryption is one of our favorite courses. And we're discussing new ways to see how, for example, encryption can be enhanced, or analytics and encryption can be combined through private AI, for example. So we're exploring those avenues. And even we're looking like even more forward, and we're looking at what the future may look like, especially for encryption. And we're looking at quantum computing that sounds like distant, but it's coming. And last year we had our first summit here at Georgetown SCS on quantum computing. So we have like experts coming from around the world discussing what are the challenges for quantum computing, and encryption was a big talk, right? So like they're calling that the quantum Mageddon or something like that. So that was something that was really highlighted during that time. So as you can see, we are really addressing and trying to be in the forefront of changes in our society. Could be social change, but it's also right now a lot of change related to technology, and we're trying to keeping up by partnering and collaborating with community like yours. So we are very welcoming you to reach out and to have a discussion and to continue the discussion on it could be on cryptocurrency, could be on encryption. We're always open to explore new ways to support. For example, educating policymaker, legislators, and so on ongoing change in our society. So on this, I will stop here and I will give you back the mic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. This is a beautiful facility, by the way. So we just appreciate it so much that you've worked with me on this. And it's been quite a bit of work. The university I don't think they've had many events this size since COVID. So we've had to, push the process a little bit. It was a little bit challenging, but it's awesome. To wrap up our Global Encryption Day celebration, I want to share my personal thoughts about how encryption is under serious attack. Ryan described earlier how governments around the world have shifted their efforts to weaken encryption from their existing insistence on having backdoors. They're much more subtle workarounds that have the similar effect. There is much work to be done globally to fight back against those efforts around the world. But sadly, we need to do it right here in Washington, D.C. One of the attacks on encryption that I am most worried about, which hasn't been discussed at all so far today, is what has happened recently with the U.S. Treasury Office of Foreign Asset Control sanctions of Tornado Cash. You may have not viewed the OFAC sanctions in that light, but that is exactly the effect they are having on crypto. And that should be extremely disturbing to everyone here who cares about pretty good policy for cryptocurrency. Allow me to emphasize that just one more time as we recognize Global Encryption Day. The OFAC sanctions on Tornado Cash are an attack on encryption and are definitely not pretty good policy for crypto. To hear more on that topic, please consider tuning into a Federalist Society panel next Wednesday, October 26th at 11 a.m. The panel will discuss OFAC's blacklisting of Tornado Cash and the implications for financial privacy and free speech. I will be on that panel with Michael Mosier of Espresso Systems, Dr. Kevin Warbach from the Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania, and Professor J.W. Verrett of the Antonin Scalia School of Law at George Mason University. Before we wrap up, I want you all to make sure that you get one of these awesome Global Encryption Day bottles that we have had made for you. There's tons of them, so please have one. Also, there's these very beautiful Privacy is Normal shirts. So I want you all to have one. There's probably enough for everyone to have one. And the essay that Phil Zimmermann wrote, Why I Wrote PGP. So important, so good. I would love for you all to take one of these and read it. I was going to buy like a whole book that was like, it's called Crypto, which is also awesome, but it's pretty long. And I thought you might not read that. So I just said, I compromised a little bit. So please take home some reading material. So thank you all for participating in today's celebration of Global Encryption Day. It is my sincere hope that when we meet next year for this day, we will have made progress in our fight for encryption. Now we will turn to our usual PGP for crypto programming and say goodbye to our live stream. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
Recording here too.
Recording stopped.